Good evening and welcome to another episode of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Melissa Whitecross, and I'm streaming to you live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Tonight is all about the blue swallow and its conservation, and we are extremely grateful to the Hans Hohausen Charitable Trust, the N3 Toll Concession, and the IUCN Rapid Action Species SOS Grant for Africa, which is jointly funded by the European Commission, for their support of this conservation project, which is a partnership between BirdLife South Africa, Conservation Outcomes, and Ezemvelo KwaZulu-Natal Wildlife. You can communicate with us using the Zoom chat room, and your questions for our speakers can be posted into the Q&A box throughout the webinar. So if you're watching us on Facebook Live, all you have to do is use the comment feed, and your comments and questions will be fed back to our speakers at the end of the webinar. Use the hashtag Conservation Conversations on all social media channels to let us know that you're tuning in, and catch up on any of our previous episodes via the BirdLife South Africa YouTube channel and our podcast. If you've not done so yet, please can we put out a plea to all of you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This helps us grow support for our webinar content and boosts our viewership on the platform. Now, so many of you have generously supported these webinars over the past year, and to celebrate a year on air, we're giving our listeners a chance to donate and win the incredible Ultimate Companion for Birding in Southern Africa, written by Peter Ginn, who is in our audience this evening, and Jeff McKean. This competition is only open to South African-based viewers, and to qualify for entry into April's competition, simply donate a minimum of 100 Rand via the Quicket Donations platform before the 30th of April 2021. There is no limit on the number of entries, so the more you donate, the better your chance of winning. Simply scan the QR code using your phone camera, or visit the Conservation Conversations webpage, where you can find the link to our donations portal. I'll also be posting the link to donations portal into tonight's chat box as well. Your contributions help us to keep these talks free for all to learn and enjoy, so a big thank you for all of the contributions received so far. Now, BirdLife South Africa's 5th virtual Learn About Birds, or LAB conference, will run on 27 and 28 May 2021 through the Zoom platform. Registrations can be carried out through the BirdLife South Africa website, and the program for this event is now available on the LAB website. To find out more or to register for this event, please visit the BirdLife South Africa website or email lab2021@birdlife.org.za. Our AGM is also going virtual this year and will be held on 29 May after the LAB conference. To register for this important event, please visit the flock page under the events tab on our website, or email flock2021@birdlife.org.za. There are some really exciting announcements and things happening during our AGM this year, and I would very much encourage all of you to tune in on the 29th of May. Now, we are thrilled to be able to announce that an addition to the LAB program has been secured, and we will be hosting the LAB Canon Photography Workshop, which will be taking place after BirdLife South Africa's AGM on Saturday, 29 May 2021. This will be a 2-hour workshop hosted by Canon South Africa and presented by nature and wildlife photographer Andrew Averley, and will showcase tips and tricks for improving your wildlife photography skills. Be sure to register for this event via the Quicket platform. The link to register will be available in the chat room after this, or on the LAB website. Tickets are just 250 Rand per person, and attendees who also joined the LAB conference will qualify for the lucky draw to win a Canon-sponsored prize. If you'd like more information, just email lab2021@birdlife.org.za. Now, you'll notice a bit of a virtual theme at BirdLife South Africa this year as we navigate the continued COVID-19 impacted world, but we are very excited to announce that our virtual African Bird Fair is making a return to your screens, and it is bigger and better than last year. It'll be taking place on 30 and 31 July 2021, with some absolutely world-class speakers lined up to don your screens. So be sure to watch BirdLife South Africa's media channels to find out more about this exciting event. But on to tonight's main event. We are very excited to have 2 of BirdLife South Africa's partners joining us to celebrate the conservation work we are jointly carrying out on the blue swallow in KwaZulu-Natal. Brent Coverdale has over 20 years of conservation experience, focused predominantly on avian fauna and their associated habitats. He currently oversees the conservation of threatened taxa within KwaZulu-Natal, including vultures, cranes, oribi, and the blue swallow. He currently represents Ezemvelo on a number of national working groups, including the National Vulture Task Force, the White-winged Flufftail Working Group, and the National Wildlife Poisoning Prevention Working Group. He has a passion to see the implementation of an environmental stewardship program implemented across the globe, and we are very, very glad to have Brent with us this evening. Brent is also joined tonight by Steve McKean, who has over 29 years experience as an ecologist, specializing mainly in the sustainable resource use and natural resource management. Steve has a strong interest and expertise in vegetation ecology and resource economics, water resource and catchment management, as well as in developing and implementing market-based mechanisms and incentives to address conservation challenges. His passion is in developing and implementing incentive-based solutions to conservation challenges. He was one of the initiators of the KZN Biodiversity Stewardship Program in 2005-2006 and is an active member of the program's Provincial Steering Committee. Steve is also part of our Landscape Conservation Program at BirdLife South Africa, and it is wonderful to have both of you on the show this evening. We are really looking forward to hearing what you have to share about the critically endangered blue swallow in South Africa. And I'd like to let everybody know that at the end of tonight's webinar, before we get into questions, we will be launching another poll. So please do stick around to answer that before you exit the webinar screen and answer our post-webinar survey questions this evening. Thank you both so much for joining us, Steve and Brent. It's wonderful to have you with us, and I'm going to let you share your screen and take us through tonight's talk.
Yeah, thank you very much, Melissa, and thank you so much for affording us this opportunity. A big shout out for everybody that has joined tonight. I see from far and wide. Yeah, and it's an exciting opportunity that we get this opportunity to present to you tonight and stuff. And I really hope you do enjoy it, and encourage you to participate in the poll afterwards as well.
Indeed, yeah. Good evening, everybody, and yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully we make it worth a while. I think most people are having this during their supper time, so hopefully it's a good talk to go with dinner.
Yeah, so thanks very much. So kind of just want to take a step back and allow everybody that's listening and watching tonight just to kind of read this quote that I've put up there. And I think this kind of sums it up quite succinctly as to where we are at currently with the blue swallow. And it's kind of a do or die kind of scenario that we find ourselves in. And if we don't do something now and do something well, unfortunately, we're not going to do anything at all. And then it's kind of, this is not to be a doom and gloom and try to be the eternal optimist, but we kind of at ground zero now when it comes to blue swallow conservation and stuff. So this quote really kind of sums up where we're at and stuff. But just to kind of take a step back, I think it's quite important to basically say, you know, not just who we are as individuals, but who we are as the organizations that we represent and work for. So for those of you that don't know, KZN Wildlife, Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife is the provincial conservation agency in KwaZulu-Natal who are mandated to conserve biodiversity. So we have a legal mandate to look after our natural resources. And a lot of people think, well, that's just game reserves and protected areas, and it goes way beyond that. So it's everything within our formally declared protected areas. It's everything outside. It's monitoring threatened species. It's legislative enforcement. It's raising awareness. And so it's a very broad spectrum of conservation-related activities that KZN Wildlife is responsible for. And it brings with it a lot of challenges, but also a lot of exciting opportunities. And one of those is blue swallows. And in KZN, we have been responsible for the oversight and actual monitoring for the last 20 years. And part of that is including basically the only formally declared protected area that has blue swallows in South Africa, and that is Pendle Nature Reserve, which is situated about 40 km outside of Howick in KZN. So if you want to know more about us, visit www.kznwildlife.com.
Hi again, everybody. Yeah, Conservation Outcomes. We're a small NGO. We are now 6 years old, and we were set up basically to support private and communal conservation on important biodiversity conservation on private and community owned land. As I said, we're an NGO. and we are partnering with BirdLife South Africa and Ezemvelo KwaZulu-Natal Wildlife right now to conserve the blue swallow and its habitat. There's a lot more to what we do, but I won't go into all of it now. And as Brent said, so for more information, you can go to our website at www.conservation-outcomes.org and find out more about what we do there. But we principally specialize in establishing and supporting protected area expansion in biodiversity important areas on private and communal land outside of state-run protected areas.
Okay, so getting back to the main theme of tonight's webinar, and I thought, well, where do we basically start? And you kind of got to start right at the beginning. So I thought a little blue swallow 101. Some of you might have been very fortunate to see a blue swallow. Some of you might be wanting to see a blue swallow. And so kind of just thought, let's start right at the beginning. And so it's this very distinctive iridescent metallic blue swallow that zips around in and out of the grasslands, the misbelt grasslands of KZN, Mpumalanga, and Limpopo. And anyone that's chased the blue swallow, either to tick it or just to see it, will know it's not something that you just arrive and see and go home. If you want photographs, well, that's all a whole different story. But it really is something that is a phenomenal sight to when you actually get to see it, how it glimmers in the sunlight, and it definitely worth a tick on any worthy birders list. And so kind of that's where we really start. It's an intra-African migrant, so it kind of spends summers here in South Africa and then kind of winters in East Africa, and that in itself creates numerous challenges for conserving a species when we're really only responsible for it for 6 months of the year. It favors these high altitude grasslands, anywhere between 850 and 1900 meters above sea level, with a rainfall greater than 1,000 millimeters per annum. So that's kind of where we're looking at within South Africa, is kind of where we're going to find it. They're cooperative breeders and kind of breed in anything from sinkholes, abandoned mine shafts, aardvark holes. So really are quite specific in what they're looking for within this grassland habitat. And so it lays three eggs with about 2 to 3 clutches per season. So kind of that's the kind of species that we're dealing with. And to kind of put that what this actually entails, I kind of thought a little bit of some pictures to kind of describe the blue swallow and what we get to experience. And I'm very fortunate that I get to experience this for 6 months of the year. So when you get out there and you're starting to look for these birds, this is kind of what you potentially might encounter when you're trying to find a nest site. A very obscure hole in the ground, as you can see, no bigger than the size of a cap, which kind of opens up into a very dark cavity underground, where these birds then start and choose to nest. And so you've got to have the right climatic and soil conditions to enable birds to be nesting underground. And then they start off with building this nest out of mud, and slowly start building it up, putting it into grass. And they attach this to the wall, and that brings some challenges. We've encountered nests falling off the walls actually collapsing, and so not the most ideal place to build a nest, but that's the species we're dealing with. And kind of once they've got that right and built that nest, they then start to line that with some nice down feathers, and they then start to lay their eggs into that. And so there you can see that natural progression from the building the nest, lining it with feathers, and then laying the eggs, and then after that, these eggs then hatch into these naked tiny little blobs that take between 14 and 18 days from hatching to fledging. And you kind of then are very fortunate when you're doing the monitoring to get greeted by this little picture of 3 hungry little mouths just waiting, and that's really kind of where this really starts. And these are the next generation of a critically endangered species, and that's what we're trying to achieve, is to give them the best shot at life. And you can see those very distinctive yellow gapes that kind of really stick out, and that's what basically they use to attract their parents to feed them. And that's kind of where the life cycle then gets to. You've got these fledged chicks, and there you can see the adult coming in to feed them, and they're shouting loudly for that food. And I've been very fortunate and privileged in my monitoring to see how these young chicks come out the nest. They're not strong enough to fly, and they basically sit around, and parents come feed them. And then slowly after that, they'll then start to feed on the wing. And the chicks fly for maybe 20 seconds with the parents, and then they go rest again. And then the parents fly around hawking, looking for food, come and feed them on the wing. And that's how they build up their muscle mass and start to get fitter, enabling them to then take that migratory journey north during the winter time. And then the cycle would start again and stuff. And that we've been very fortunate I've been very fortunate to see this year in and year out. And I've basically been doing this for the last 14 years. And in that time, seen a number of challenges, seen a number of changes. But all in all, every time that I go out, something new, I see something new. And indeed, is a blessing for me. But where do we sit with the kind of species currently? You know, so if we kind of look at where their conservation status is, if you had participated in the pre-webinar poll, you would have seen that their global conservation status is currently classified as vulnerable, with an estimated 1,100 to 1,400 pairs, just to kind of round those numbers up. So it could extrapolate that to maybe 4,000 to 5,000 individual birds. However, when we kind of come back home and closer to South Africa, and as we know, South Africa is a country on its own. We're responsible for the species that occur here, despite what happens globally. And yeah, where the rubber really hits the road, and they're kind of classified as critically endangered. And the current estimates are there's most probably less than 250 individuals with between 35 and 50 breeding pairs. And that really is the stark reality that we're sitting with. But for a lot of people, when you start talking about blue swallows and you kind of saying, critically endangered versus vulnerable, and how do you really put that into perspective and to something people will understand? So kind of for the last 10 years, most members of the public, conservationists, have really been bombarded with the plight of the rhino. So I kind of thought maybe it's an ideal opportunity to let's put this into perspective in relation to the rhino, because most people can identify with that. So let's look at the global white rhino population. Is anywhere between 17,500 and 18,000 individuals. So if each rhino on the screen represents 1,000 individuals, that basically sums up the global population of white rhino in the world. So let's look at where we then sit with the global population of blue swallows. And basically, once again, each individual representing 1,000. And so the upper limit would be 5,000. So you can see considerably fewer specimens compared to the white rhino. And we know what marketing and airtime white rhinos get. So kind of that puts a little bit into perspective that even though we say globally it's vulnerable, it's still very much a threatened species. And let's bring that a little bit closer to home, and we start to look at, we know South Africa is the global hotspot for rhino population. So we know this is kind of where it is predominantly. And so we're kind of looking at roughly about 12,500, 13,000 individuals. And so once again, one single rhino represents 1,000 individuals. And then we bring it into perspective in terms of how many blue swallows there are. And unfortunately, there's only 250. So we can't even make up one little picture on the screen in this comparison. And that's the reality of where we currently sit. But we're definitely not getting the same amount of airtime when it comes to conserving blue swallows as we potentially are in terms of the rhino. And that just kind of really hits home the message that we're going to try to get across to you tonight is we really are in dire straits when it comes to the species. And yes, locally in South Africa, but I even think potentially globally, we're not sitting with masses of blue swallows flying around everywhere. And so kind of that's where we currently sit.
Right, so why are we in this predicament? Well, the primary reason for where we are sitting right now is the loss of this bird's grassland habitat. And this has been put down certainly historically to afforestation. And here you can see this picture actually illustrated very nicely. It's got a nice composite of all kinds of things that we're going to talk about. Although afforestation has taken away a lot of habitat, we don't believe that it's currently doing it because there's not really an expansion of commercial forestry right now. But certainly historically, it definitely has been one of the factors. Agricultural development and and turning over of land, grassland into monoculture crops. But where I've circled is actually rural housing development. That's expanding, it's ever expanding, rural housing growth. And then, and then, yeah, mismanagement of grasslands. Although we do have a fair bit of grassland left in the province, a lot of it is in fact degraded. And that picture on the bottom left gives a good illustration of that. So you can see that fence line contrast with the good grassland on the right and a fairly mismanaged, to put it mildly, fire break on the left next to that plantation. And I'll talk a little bit more about it in the next few slides, but we're losing our grasslands at quite an impressive rate, well, depending on how you look at it. Right, so, okay, so right, the demise of our grasslands. Let's look at what's been happening. That's what our grassland map looked like in 1990. All the green showing where the grassland, where the undisturbed and unmodified natural areas were in 1990. In 2017, that's what it looked like. Let me go back again. That's 1990, 2017. We are losing our grasslands at the rate of about 6% a year through land modification and other land use change, basically. Moving into to focus in on where the blue swallows are. In 1990, that's what this looked like, and the red blobs are where the blue swallow areas are. Back to 2017, look how much less grassland we have. We go back again, you can have another look. Again, yeah, and you can see how it looks like white ants are eating it out. It's being lost at a rapid rate.
So we've kind of painted the picture as to where we currently sit, you know, what the blue swallow is about and some of the threats that it's facing and things. And so as an organization and as a province, because we kind of represent the province of KZN, we can't just sit back on our laurels and say, oh, well, it's all doom and gloom. We've basically got to say, well, how do we go about changing the trajectory for the species and stuff? And so as the province of KZN, we've set ourselves some objectives and some targets, and we basically as a province want to ensure a demographically viable subpopulations of the blue swallows, not only within protected areas but also on communal and private land, because we know that we as KZN Wildlife can't do it on our own. It's definitely about partnerships, and that we basically feed into a bigger national picture. And originally we had set a target of 80 active nests by 2020. And so we've kind of missed that mark considerably, and it's not through the lack of trying or the lack of initiatives, but it just kind of shows that what kind of pressure we have. So we're currently reviewing that target as to something that potentially might be a bit more realistic, but at the same time still putting the bar quite high, because what you don't want to be is a box ticker and set a low target that you can tick the box and give yourself all a bunch of high fives and pats on the back, but it really doesn't mean anything. And we really feel that the target's got to be representative of what's needed to conserve the species. And then kind of looking long term, we feel that the upper limit of where we really need to be is about 156 nests. So we are considerably off, but you know, if you don't aim high and you know shoot for the stars, you're never going to achieve the things that are of worthwhile. And I think for most of us that are involved in the species, we kind of want to leave a legacy where we've achieved something. And if we don't have a high enough target, we're not going to get that. So what have we been doing to at least try and reduce the loss and slow the loss and turn this ship around and stuff? So the first thing is obviously good information leads to good decision making. And so the first bit of our interventions is monitoring. And, you know, if we don't know what's happening with the species, we don't know what we're going to be able to do to save it. So currently in KZN, we look at the number of active nests and their locality. So looking at private versus protected. We look at the number of eggs, the number of chicks, the number of fledglings, and we're also looking at the change in habitat. And so those maps that Steve was going through is basically as part of our ongoing monitoring programs, which as an organization, we report into our state of biodiversity, which we compile every year in terms of understanding what is happening to the state of biodiversity in the province. And that's the kind of information that we're looking at. And then also what we're wanting to try and achieve is like giving the birds their best shot. So are their nest sites and the areas that they're looking to nest in really 100%? So are you staying in the Formula One, or are you staying in the Hilton? And what we're trying to say is we want to make sure our nesting areas are the Hilton and the best for the birds, and not the kind of dodgy Formula One on the side of the highway type of thing. So pre-season, we go out, we check that holes are still viable, they haven't collapsed, they're not covered in alien plants. And that involves the various monitors, it involves various landowners, so we're getting them involved, and that's part of our awareness raising. And so really getting them out. But all of this is not without its challenges. And so monitoring brings its own challenges, because it's very specific in terms of where you want to go and how you want to go without having a big impact on the birds. So they nest in the mist-belt grasslands, and that's basically what it is there's often a lot of mist, a lot of rain in the summer months. And so you don't want to be going to try and find these birds when it's belting down with rain, potentially disturbing them on a nest when it's cold or when it's misty. So you kind of choose those days where you're going to have the least impact. Then also, you know, I never ever thought that I as a monitor would ever require a selfie stick. I'm not that kind of person that's going to stand there taking selfies. But what an amazing thing for blue swallow monitoring. You basically stick your smartphone on the end of it, stick it in a hole, you can take pictures of the nest, how many eggs, and you can be in and out without having, within 5 seconds. 20 years ago, guys were sticking little mirrors on the back end of sticks and trying to see what was in the nest and stuff. And so really technology and the advent of technology has helped us now. We can document information, we can see into nests, and really reduce that impact of us being at the nest and stuff. So that all presents some of the challenges, and then there's those things that we've got no control over, which just add into these challenges. And you drive 200 k's from your point of origin to have a look at a nest site, and you get greeted with this. And basically you have one entrance into some of your nesting areas, and you basically drive back home. And so I put this up there not to be provocative or anything, but basically just to say, some of the challenges we've got no control over, and we have to accept that and stuff. So if we kind of then start looking at what are the numbers telling us, and so this is kind of shows and demonstrates the long-term data sets that have been generated by monitors in KZN, and I'm not saying just KZN Wildlife, because this is the collaborative partnerships that have been undertaken for blue swallow monitoring over the years. And unfortunately, that black line doesn't paint a pretty picture, and it does show that it's starting, there's a downward trend. But what I have put in there is the red line, and that's kind of the land modification. As the land is being modified and we're losing grassland, as that's going up, there's kind of a correlation. And if there are any statisticians in the audience, please don't shoot me down. But basically, we are losing land and losing natural areas, and at the same time, we're losing blue swallow sites and nesting areas. So is there a correlation, and a strong correlation? We would like to think so, but we can improve the data and we can improve those stats. But it really just paints the picture that the things aren't doing well, and it kind of reaffirms what myself and Steve as monitors are actually seeing on the ground and stuff. And then we kind of look at the same kind of data, which is to be expected. If your nests are going down, the number of eggs that you're seeing are also going down, as well as the number of chicks, and then the number of fledglings. So kind of that all speaks to the kind of same picture that we've been painting. So kind of we're definitely going out and having a look at what's happening with the birds. We're trying to prep them, but that's where we know the birds are. And so how do we want to, if we want to grow, we've also got to know where potentially they might be, and start looking after those areas where maybe they're not birds now, but where we would want them to be in the future. So one of the other conservation interventions that we've implemented is our niche modeling. So through a McKean modeling process, we've undertaken using a number of variables. So taking known and historical sites, and then looking at things like our vegetation maps, the altitude, mean annual precipitation, rainfall, slope aspect, and plugging those through a modeling process to kind of say, guys, if you really want to see where potentially blue swallows might be, this is what's going to pop out. And so we've run this model, and kind of the map on the left-hand side will show where kind of the green areas are, and the colors change, and I'll explain that. But that's kind of roughly where one would potentially, and there's a big potential there where birds might occur. And then you start to say, well, yeah, there's a bit of a stretch in the foothills of the Berg, but where else are we going to look and stuff? And then if we look at the map on the right, you'll see that it's graded into three areas: yellow, orange, and red. And the yellow areas are kind of where, yeah, there's a potential, but a very low potential. And so if we remove those from the map and we just say, right, let's just look at the orange and red areas, because if you're looking at what resources you have available, where do we need to be, it kind of reduces that area quite considerably. And then if you had to say, well, where are we going to get the best bang for our buck, and we're going to just go look at the red areas, and so it reduces once again. And you can see I've overlaid, if you look really carefully, the nesting sites, and so we've implemented this, and we have had some success, and we have found some new nesting areas. And so, and we're very excited that through a data and a model process, we can find potentially new sites and stuff. And as new data becomes available, you get improved land coverages, transformation layers. We're constantly refining this model, and that's very exciting, because we can use this then to justify why we want no further grassland loss. So this is one of the ways that we're not only using it to find blue swallows, but we're wanting it to also be that it's securing grassland habitat for future populations. So as we need to grow to build the population, we need to be looking after those grassland areas now. And the kind of binary approach of presence or absence cannot be used in a decision-making process. So we've got to say there's definitely a good opportunity that blue swallows could inhabit this area, and so therefore we need to conserve it.
Right, so what are we doing to actually conserve habitat? So there are a couple of things. The first thing, we are trying to secure habitat through working with private and communal landowners. And the principal mechanism that we're doing this through is called the Biodiversity Stewardship mechanism. Now, this is probably the subject of a presentation all on its own, but basically it's working with private and communal landowners is a completely voluntary program to conserve the critical biodiversity on private and or communal land. And it's backed by legislation. It has 4 basic options or categories for participating landowners, and those are shown in the diagram. And those range right from a top level of being a declared nature reserve, which then has basically the same status as somewhere like Clifford-Mfolozi Game Reserve. It is protected in terms of Section 23 of the Protected Areas Act. It's binding on successors in title, and so on. Then moving down, I'm not going to talk about all the different categories now because it will take too long, but basically with increasing landowner commitment, they're also increasing benefits to that landowners, and there's different levels of security. Different categories attract different incentives and benefits, and something like a nature reserve does attract a very nice tax benefit in terms of Section 37 capital D of the South African Income Tax Act. Again, we've done a webinar previously on this subject, and it is the subject of an entire webinar on its own. But in very quickly, that it enables a landowner to potentially claim back the full value of that land that is under a nature reserve status off their income tax at a rate of 4% a year over 25 years. So for some people, that's very significant. Very importantly, all these options are completely voluntary. This is not a potential sort of takeover of anybody's land. Nobody comes onto somebody else's land and tells them what to do. We develop management plans and annual plans of operation with landowners, not for them. And then again, very critically, landowners retain full title and ownership in all instances. So it is a very successful and efficient mechanism to try and achieve biodiversity targets, because the state, certainly in South Africa, is not going to be buying land for conservation reasons anytime soon. So then this is just a map showing where some of the protected areas are that we're working with. and where in that red circle is basically the blue swallow area, and then those red blobs highlighted are where the blue swallow nest holes are. The red triangle in the left, on that elongated little green blob there, is in Pentland Nature Reserve. That is the only state-run protected area that has blue swallows in at the moment. So we mentioned earlier that there are no other formally declared areas that have blue swallows, and that's not strictly true, because there are several stewardship sites that are formally declared in terms of Protected Areas Act and are declared nature reserves that do have blue swallows, and these being Tilly-Tudlem Nature Reserve, Trewergy Nature Reserve, Minerva, which is a declared nature reserve in terms of the KZN Provincial Ordinance, but it's currently not compliant with the Protected Areas Act. So we're working with those landowners to ensure compliance in terms of a properly developed management plan and so on and so forth. That's in a process at the moment. And then Roselands Nature Reserve, which was declared a nature reserve in 2008, and at this moment is probably the stronghold of blue swallows in KZN as far as we know. And then a new property that we're working with very cooperative and willing landowners, Neroda, most people will know it as the Buddhist Retreat Center. Then that has a long history of breeding blue swallows on some very, very good mist-bulk grassland. And then right down in the south, and probably the furthest southerly distribution of the blue swallow in Africa, is a place called Sunnyvale. And we're working with the landowners there to try and secure the area there. That has at least 2 breeding pairs of blue swallow on that property as well. And then just to give you some idea of what these areas look like, we've got Trewergy and Tilly-Tudlem in the middle, Roselands, Sunnyvale, Ralton, and then I forgot to mention Ralton Nature Reserve, which is a recently declared SAPI-owned nature reserve near Ikopo in KwaZulu-Natal, also prime mist-bulk grassland and with breeding blue swallows, and then the Buddhist Retreat or Neroda. We have declared just over 3,000 hectares, which doesn't sound a lot in some terms, of mist-bulk grassland and blue swallow habitat. And we are working on a further 1,500 at the moment, which is in various stages of the stewardship process that we're dealing with. Then the other key thing, and probably the most important thing, is the support to landowners. It's one thing declaring a protected area in any particular category, but you can't just then walk away and leave a landowner to manage a nature reserve. Most people are not conservation managers, and it's not their primary thing in life. So it's very, very important that we maintain post-declaration support to existing protected areas, as well as working with landowners to secure new sites. And in doing that, we make sure and we help landowners to make sure they comply with the Protected Areas Act. And that means, firstly, a compilation and an approval of a management plan and implementing that management plan. We support with ecological advice and particularly with annual management meetings, helping landowners with pre-fire season inspections and assessments. Fire is an integral part of these grasslands ecology, and getting the grazing and fire and rest rotation thing right is critically important to both the grasslands and the blue swallows that live in them, and the other things that live in them as well. And then importantly as well, invasive alien plant management and assistance. Invasive aliens in these grasslands is a huge issue. A very expensive one for conservation managers to try and manage. So what we as the Conservation Outcomes BirdLife South Africa Partnership are doing is we've facilitated a herbicide assistance program. And again, a big shout out to the Department of Environment Affairs and Forestry and Fisheries. We've facilitated this assistance program with them, whereby we help stewardship sites, landowners with free herbicide for assisting them to combat alien plants. And this year alone, just to blue swallow sites, we distributed probably just over 40,000 rands worth of herbicide that otherwise would have had to be paid for by landowners in these times where things are tight. Everybody knows what the situation is. And then importantly, extension and awareness. We're doing presentations like the one we're doing this evening. And then we have had a couple of popular articles, and we'll continue to do more of those. We have regular social media inputs. And then particularly Brent, my friend here, is very good at offering permitting advice to landowners. And I know his phone is often buzzing and after hours and stuff as well with these kinds of questions. But it's a very important piece of support, because getting the right permits for the right reasons and being compliant with the law is important, that we keep that going.
Yeah, this whole extension and awareness to landowners, communities is just reinforcing that partnerships that we out there. KZN Wildlife, BirdLife, we can't do this on our own, and so kind of that extension component is a vital aspect of our work, to ensure that there's cooperative buy-in from everybody, that everybody understands why it's important to save the blue swallow. But as much as what we're doing now in terms of getting out there, monitoring the stewardship program, extension and awareness, and the likes, there's still a lot of unknowns, and that's kind of where we also sit, and we try to grapple about how do we answer these unknowns, and what are some of them. So as I mentioned earlier on, we're responsible for the birds for 6 months of the year, and then kind of they leave and overwinter kind of in East Africa. And so we need to really get a good understanding of what's happening in these overwintering grounds, because what we are seeing is we're seeing birds breeding every year, we're seeing chicks fledging, but what we're not seeing is an increase in the number of adults. So we're not seeing nest sites increasing as more and more birds breed. And every year we kind of go back to the same sites, and there's the same number of adults there, barring one or two, or an increase of one or two, but it's not correlated to how many birds are breeding and how many chicks are fledging every year. So kind of, is that something that's happening en route, or is that something that's happening in their overwintering grounds? And then that begs the next question, well, have their migratory routes become compromised? As we see further development north of us, we see more and more people kind of moving to cities expanding, changing habitat use. Have these traditional migratory routes become compromised? Are they potentially not finding enough food? Are they making it to their overwintering grounds? And we've attempted to answer some of these questions through various scientific techniques, through isotope analysis, through DNA analysis. And the thing is often for those things, you've got to have a bird in the hand. And I relay a story of a colleague of ours kind of traveled north of us to kind of their overwintering grounds to try and catch birds to start this isotope analysis. And the joke is the only thing he caught was malaria. And not to take the seriousness away about having malaria, but that's how difficult it is to answer some of these questions and stuff. And there are definitely a lot of scientists that are very keen to answer these things, but we haven't got there yet. But these are some of the unknowns that we need to. And then the next big question is the rest of the global population secure and conserved? And BirdLife South Africa have really identified this as a key intervention that we really need to resurrect and understand what is happening in the rest of the global population. And is it secure, and are they conserved? And we're not saying they're not, but we're not sure. And that might just be through a lack of reporting and relationships. And we really identify this as a need to build that relationship with our international colleagues to really feel confident in terms of where the species globally stands. And then the question that I've already alluded to, what happens to each year's offspring? If they are breeding and they are fledging, at some of our more productive sites, you're producing somewhere between 12 and 15 fledglings a year, but we're not seeing that growth in the population. So what is happening? Where are they going? Are they going to places we're not looking? And with the awareness that we've been doing in KZN for the last 20 years, I'm very confident that we would have seen those sites, and we haven't seen the same growth in the numbers as is being bred. So that's definitely some of those unknowns that we really need to do. But we can harp on these things about things we don't know and what we're trying to do, but we've really, as conservationists and as BirdLife South Africa, Conservation Outcomes, KZN Wildlife, really got to say, well, what do we need to do to really get going and save the species? And so we kind of got to say, well, where are we going forward? And sometimes it's bite-sized activities and really getting things. So the first thing we really feel we need to expand the monitoring and surveillance into Mpumalanga and Limpopo. And when expanding, I'm not saying it's not been done, but really revigorate it and create, just make it a little bit more stronger. A couple of years ago, there was a big push to get a biodiversity management plan for the species, and kind of it's a couple of stumbling blocks in getting that finalized. So that's one of the things we've put on the action plan for this year. And the biodiversity management plan will just create the buy-in from all government departments, not just necessarily the environmental affairs and conservation departments. So we really see that as a big priority to get the BMP finished for the species. And then it's one thing securing the sites through the stewardship program that Steve has alluded to, but we need to secure additional breeding sites and really grow the whole stewardship program. So we know that where the birds are currently are secure, they're safe, they're not going to be transformed, they're going to be managed well. And that's really what we feel is we've got to get more. And then obviously that comes with resource challenges. But while we building the amount of stewardship sites, we can't ignore the existing ones, and so we've got to continue that support for those existing sites, and that also comes with its challenges in terms of resources and stuff, and continued awareness and extension to landowners, communities, and the likes about the importance of grassland habitat, saving grasslands, saving the blue swallows, and constantly looking for opportunities to just raise the profile of the species, and not just waiting to be invited to give a talk. At every opportunity, kind of spreading the message. Then continued surveillance of nesting areas to ensure optimal conditions for nesting. So that's about going out and checking historical sites, checking the existing sites. Are they still optimal? Is the ecological functioning of that system still ideal for the blue swallows? And understanding what those nuances are in the environment that is suitable for blue swallows. And then obviously the big thing is answering some of the unknowns. And we've already initiated a workshop later this year where we've invited a number of international colleagues to kind of kickstart that relationship again between all the blue swallow range states, and saying, hey guys, I think we really need to put this species back on the radar and really start to understand. But all these things wouldn't be possible. It's not going to just be the BirdLife South Africa, KZN Wildlife conservation outcomes. And so I do have to give a big shout out to a couple of people, one specifically Richard Flack and Roger Hogg, who have kindly allowed us to use some of their amazing photographs that they've got. 15 years ago, all you saw, most of the pictures for blue swallows were something that was blurred and blue, and people claimed it as a blue swallow photograph. And with the advent of technology and people getting out there, we really got some amazing shots, and we're very privileged and fortunate to be able to use those in our talk tonight, and then us mere mortals that have provided some of the other ones. And then I've just been doing this as part of my work, but there's been a whole lot of monitors and other people that have been involved in monitoring the species for the last 20 plus years. And I can't sit here tonight and list all of them, but people know who they are that have been involved in monitoring, contributing to that data, contributing to the science of the species. And I'm just here representing tonight the blue swallow. So I don't take credit for all the work that's been done, and just a big shout out to everybody that's been involved in the species throughout the years. And then obviously we've got to acknowledge the supporters of our work, and we can see them listed here, and people that have either supported us financially, supported us through human resource, through other forms of capital and stuff, and a big shout out to them. But I think the thing that we really would like to end off on tonight is it's not just what we are doing as the official conservation organizations, but it's also about what you as members of the public and can do. And so kind of just a couple of things that I really would kind of put out there is what can you as Joe Public do to save a critically endangered species? And so one is download the BirdLife app, and if you haven't done that by now, not to sound rude or anything, but you've obviously been hiding under some rock, because it really is a phenomenal thing. And I'm not punting that, and there's no relationship between myself and BirdLife, but it is really something phenomenal and something that we can benefit from. So kind of download the app and log any blue swallow sightings because we can get access to that data and understand, it might be happening in areas we're not aware of. So definitely that's the first one. The second one is kind of visit these blue swallow stewardship sites to support the private landowners conserving these species. So, it adds value to having them on their property. It adds value to the whole stewardship process. So really getting out there and encouraging members of the public to get out, support them, especially ones that offer guided tours to see the swallows. And we're working very closely with those landowners to make sure that we're not having a negative impact, but at the same time allowing people to benefit from having the species on their property. And there's massive opportunity there. And hopefully as we grow the number of sites and the landowners / communities that are involved, there's definitely opportunity there. Also help to raise the awareness about the plight of the blue swallow. So after tonight, we're going to know that the blue swallow is worse off than the rhino, and when people are talking, just thinking conservation equals rhino, we can educate them and raise that profile, and that's everybody's responsibility. It's not just mine or Steve's responsibility or Melissa's or kind of the formal conservation people. It's everybody's responsibility. And then I have to put there and talk about the elephant in the room. These things don't happen without financial support and financial resources, and kind of putting out that plea. If you feel passionate and you feel that you would like to kind of some financial support to our blue swallow projects through BirdLife South Africa, would be most welcome. And it's always an uncomfortable topic and an uncomfortable thing that we have to talk about, but unfortunately that's also the reality, and so we can't ignore that elephant in the room. And then the last one, and this is most probably kind of Melissa alluded it to in my bio right in the beginning, and that's understanding our environmental footprint. And I've said there that we should all help to reduce your environmental footprint through reduce, reuse, and recycle. And kind of you asking everybody there to start questioning what their environmental footprint is, and understanding that this me, myself, and I mantra that has kind of creeped into our everyday life is not necessarily the right thing, and understanding that, do we need something, the new camera, the new cell phone? Do we have to have the large plates of chips or the massive muffin at certain restaurants? Because those are all the issues that are leading to the demise of our grasslands. And so I just ask everybody to start asking themselves, how can they reduce their environmental footprint? And because that's ultimately what's driving the demise of the species through our loss of their grassland habitats, because of what we're doing as man. And I think it all starts with an individual. Yes, you might feel it's insignificant, but if we each have an opportunity to do that, that can eventually to build up to a massive change. But just from myself, a big shout out and thanks to BirdLife for hosting this webinar. And I hope that during the course of tonight, changed some people's perceptions and people start to understand what's happening with the blue swallow.
Yeah, thank you, Brent, and thank you, Melissa, and to BirdLife for hosting this webinar. And I really hope that everybody's enjoyed it. And we've certainly enjoyed talking to you all. So thank you very much for listening to us.
Great, Brent, Steve, thank you so much. That was an absolutely brilliant showcase for these wonderful blue swallows. And I really do appreciate all of the time that you both put into presenting this webinar. And I think if anybody wasn't a big fan of the blue swallow after this webinar, they certainly will be. And I see we've got some amazing supporters of our work tonight, as well as BirdLife South Africa, including 2 of our honorary patrons, Pamela Isdell and Gaynor Rupert, in the audience this evening. So thank you to both of them for the support that they have shown our landscape conservation program and the conservation work that you guys are doing for the blue swallow. And I think we've got a number of questions flying into our Q&A box. So if you are tuning in on Zoom, please just pop those questions into the Q&A box, and we're going to try and get through as many of them as we can. I'll let the webinar run a little bit beyond 8 o'clock tonight because there is quite a number of questions to get through. But before I go into our questions, just a reminder, next week we've got our BirdLife South Africa Seabird team returning to your screens. It is a celebration of World Penguin Day. So they will be showcasing everything you need to know and didn't know you needed to know about penguins of the world. And it is certainly going to be an absolutely fascinating webinar. So be sure to tune in and hear about another group of enigmatic bird species. I'm also going to launch our second poll of the evening now. So if you haven't yet had a go at answering the poll question tonight, we have a new question for you. Do you think controlled disturbance at nest sites should be allowed in order to generate revenue to conserve blue swallows? So in the light of what Steve and Brent have shared with you tonight, you may go ahead and answer those polling questions. But on to tonight's main course of questions for all of you. We're going to start off with Marco's question, Brent and Steve, and I'll let the two of you decide who would like to take this one on. But Marco is wondering if it's possible to offer the blue swallow alternatives in terms of man-made nest sites, and if you'd just like to elaborate a little bit around that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I'm going to take this one. So there has been in the past initiatives to build these artificial nesting sites, so digging holes, lining the holes with certain adhesive substances like cement that makes it less prone to collapse and stuff. But Steve and I have chatted long and hard about this, and we really feel that currently nesting holes are not necessarily the limiting factor for these birds. So where we are going in terms of clearing and surveying nesting areas before the breeding season, definitely the lack of nesting sites is not the problem. Yes, we have implemented some easy things where you can nail nests to the wall to prevent them falling off and stuff. So there are some fairly simple interventions that we can do, and that is through good monitoring. You start to pick those things up. So yes, so we have had a couple of sites where walls have collapsed and stuff, but that doesn't deter the birds from not nesting again. And kind of it's an amazing species that they can basically rebuild a nest from scratch within 2 weeks. And you can imagine, if you had a look at some of those photographs, those mouths are so small, but they go at it and they build those new nests. So as much as man-made interventions can work, at this point in time, it's not really something that we feel we need to spend our energies on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Brent. We've also got a question here from Michael Potts asking, in terms of encouraging communal landowners in potential nesting site areas to report blue swallow sightings, what all are you guys doing, and how do you go about getting them to keep those swallow sightings coming in?
So maybe I'll take this one again. So I have a technician that works underneath me that does monitoring at on our communal properties. There are not a lot of them, unfortunately, but where there are, we definitely have regular interaction and raising that profile and the importance of looking after these areas in communal areas, and that regular interaction kind of. So we're doing the monitoring, and it's most probably something we can improve, and that's where getting out there. And it's amazing. Most people have access to cell phones nowadays, so we do have mechanisms for that reporting to take place. But with my technicians' interaction in these community areas, that's kind of the current link. So we have a staff member that goes out there and creates that relationship with the existing communal areas.
But if I can just add a little bit to that, I know in the Buta area, some of the nest sites there were found by a cattle herder who basically sort of heard a talk at school and was then made aware of the value of these birds and made us aware of those sites, and we since then monitoring. And then another really nice little story is actually at the Buddhist Retreat Center, where one of the employees there, Mdu, is basically, they call him the father of the birds in that valley. And he lives down in that valley. It's one of the photos that was in the talk that we've just given you, where I showed the plantations at the top and the rural developments and so on. And I think he's done a lot to raise awareness in areas like that. But I agree with Brent, there's a lot more that we can and should be doing in that regard.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. And definitely, I think one of the biggest challenges we face as conservationists is getting that outreach into other areas where we haven't previously brought the likes of BirdLife and that kind of technology, and finding ways to make reporting easy for digitally disadvantaged communities. We've got a lot of questions here talking about the Mpumalanga population, and I think I'll I'll just paraphrase Professor Andrew McKechnie's question, but a number of you have asked this question in the audience tonight. And Andrew's saying he'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what caused the virtual disappearance of the Mpumalanga population about 10 years ago, and for that matter, the Volkberg population in Limpopo before that. So Brent, Steve, I'll let you guys decide who'd like to tackle that one, please.
So I could just plead the fifth year, so sorry, I only work in KZN. So yeah, Kaapse Hoop, that's always been a bit of an anomaly because nothing really changed there. And so we're not sure, yeah, and I don't think anyone is sure why they disappeared from there. Was it that they just never returned from their overwintering grounds and there wasn't enough kind of, if I can say, institutional knowledge for that to carry on? But those are some of the unknowns as to, you know, there's definite sites where nothing has changed. You know, the veld management hasn't changed, the surrounding areas haven't changed, and we've seen that even in KZN. But the birds don't come back. And is there some slight nuance that happens that we're not aware of? And yeah, I don't know if Steve would like to say anything else, but yeah.
I mean, for instance, I have seen hints in the literature about air pollution and sort of levels of chemicals in the air that could affect these birds. And again, this is a lot of thumb sucking and we don't really know, but in a place like Kaapse Hoop, it probably is likely to receive a fair amount of what they call acid rain from the sort of that Mpumalanga highlands, all those mines and stuff, and that could be having an impact on insect populations, which then obviously will have an impact on those birds. And it's not something that would be plainly visible to us. It's something that would have to be going and actively investigated. And yeah, again, you know, this is all a thumbs up. We don't actually know, to be quite honest, what these causes are.
Yeah, it certainly is a concern. And I see Dr. Warwick Tarberton just offering his vast experience, saying that back in 1980, 10 pairs were found in the 400 hectares around Kaapse Hoop that were protected and fire managed grasslands. So it is certainly concerning that we haven't really been able to put a finger on what's happened to those Mpumalanga birds. But luckily, through our current project format and the new funders that have come on board, we are looking to increase our footprint in that Mpumalanga region, and hopefully through Carl Lloyd's work, as well as Brent and Steve, your work here in KZN, we'll be able to come up with a much stronger answer to what is going on with our birds at a national scale, not just in KwaZulu-Natal. And I see we've got a couple of questions talking about the broader distribution of these birds across Africa. And I know that's something that we as BirdLife South Africa and yourselves are hoping to drive. As you mentioned in your talk, Brent, we're trying to get all the BirdLife Africa partners together where blue swallows are found, and to start getting a sort of comprehensive list of conservation activities going on across the global breeding range. But I see Paul Buckley, who's tuned in this evening, just asked if you can elaborate a little bit on what we do know at the moment in terms of their global breeding range, Zimbabwe, Tanzania. Are you able to elaborate a little bit more on that for our international viewers, or would you like to hold off and stick with South Africa?
So yeah, so I think we do have some idea, you know, birds in Zimbabwe, Malawi, breeding bird populations in Zimbabwe, Malawi, Tanzania, and then there's the overwintering areas. I'm not as clued up as to kind of their current status and how well they're doing, and I think that's one of those questions that we need to ask. And you know, is it just South Africa that's struggling with the species and kind of the challenges that 21st century conservation brings? Or is that a global status? And I think these are some of the questions we are going to be asking, you know, over the course of the next year, is to start saying, right, guys, what do we know? Where are the positive interventions happening, and can we learn from that? So if in some of the other range states their populations are doing well and growing, maybe we can learn from that. What are they doing that we potentially not doing? But if everything is suffering kind of the same fate, then we've definitely got to be working together, because the global status might change very quickly. So yeah, I think it is a challenge, and obviously, you know, with mandates of various organizations, that also presents its own challenges. So that's where this whole partnership and relationship building comes into the fore, because I can't be going doing work in Mpumalanga or outside of South Africa just because of the nature of the organization that I work for, and that's where it's building these relationships with other organizations comes into account. So I'm kind of being a bit vague, but I really don't want to say something that potentially is out of turn, and maybe in a year's time we might have a better answer.
There have been some papers published on the status of these birds in places like Tanzania by people like Stephen Evans, and who's done quite a bit of work on that kind of thing. So we do have some sort of an idea, but again, it's one thing knowing or having an idea on what the status of the birds is in a particular place, but it's quite another. So what is being done to conserve them. What we don't want is to document the extinction rate of the species and get a name on a paper. So we want to actually try and save this bird. And those are the things that we don't know, is what is actually being done, if anything is being done in our neighboring states to protect these birds and their habitat.
Absolutely, Steve. Yeah, and I see there's a couple of questions asking around Eswatini, and Mike Bridgeford asked whether the Malalochwa blue swallows were still present. And I can't speak for 2020 or this year, but I know when I was there back in 2018, the birds weren't seen that summer season, and that's right on Mpumalanga's doorstep. So certainly concerning. I don't know if you've heard anything more about the Malalochwa birds, Steve and Brent.
No, we haven't. And as far as we know, blue swallows haven't been seen in Swaziland or in Eswatini for quite some years now. Again, but that's not to say that they're not there. These birds are so easy to miss. As we alluded to during the talk, you can walk in a grassland and you can be 5 meters from a nest hole and you won't know it's there unless you fall into it. And you've got to sit and watch these birds if you see them, to see where they're diving into the grassland and that. And they are very cryptic, very quick, and very easy to miss. So because they're not being seen doesn't necessarily mean that they are not there.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing. Sorry, just to digress a little bit around the monitoring. Over the last 14 years, what I can confidently say is that these birds are highly active between 6 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock in mid-morning. And after that, the activity levels just diminish. So your window time for monitoring is kind of limited to that early morning period. And after that, you can get to a nest site. I went with a previous employee to look at a nest site. We parked, I want to say, about 1 kilometer away from the nest site, and had full visual of that nest site as we walked. Got there, checked the nest, came back. There were young chicks in the nest, and we saw absolutely 0 adult birds or any other. The only birds we saw were the chicks in the nest, and that just shows the difficulty in terms of monitoring. And often if it was for the untrained person, they would have thought there were no blue swallows there, but they were definitely there, and they fledged those chicks. But we were there, and I want to say, and we sat around watching from a distance and saw absolutely nothing. And those are the challenges. And when you kind of start saying to your employer, listen, I need to go do blue swallow monitoring, and I'm just going to sit in the grass the whole day and watch birds. It's looked a little bit circumspect that you're actually working, because you're kind of literally birding for a living, which is not a bad thing, but that's the reality and what it takes to actually monitor this bird properly, that you're getting good, reliable data and stuff.
Yeah. I think you're living the dream there, Brent, getting paid to bird. But I think we'll take one more question before we finish up. And this one's from Petros Ngwenya. He says, thanks for a brilliant talk. You've indicated that you had targets of 80 active nests by 2020, which was missed by a big margin, but you've also set a new target of 156 active nests by 2040. You'd just like to know a little bit more about how you set these targets and how you ensure that these are realistic goals to go for. I know you said that we were sort of shooting for the stars, but how do we kind of keep those realistic aspirations? If you'll just elaborate a bit more on that, please, Brent and Steve.
Yeah, so a lot of those targets were taken from the known historical sites. So where historically birds did occur. So we kind of had a benchmark of where we should be, and saying, right, so this is the bottom end of the curve that we can't go below. And then how do we then build from that to be representative of the entire range within the province, and suitably to secure an adequate sample size for the birds. And so that's where we kind of looked at where we wanted to get to. So in terms of those targets, yes, we most probably were, we most probably a little bit too ambitious, but at the time people thought, no, this is achievable. What we didn't bank on was the amount of challenges that would come with that, and that's not only resource constraints but changes in the environment and things like that. So it's definitely something we've got to go back to and re-look at, but at the same time we can't just lower the bar so we can tick that box to say we've reached it. So yeah, and that's always the challenge with setting targets, is you can't make them too low just so you can tick the box, but it was based on historical nesting information, where the birds occurred, and then saying, right, let's now base a target on knowing that we can still grow that a little bit.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brent, for that explanation. All right, there are many, many more questions that we haven't had time to get to, but what I will do is share the Q&A list with Brent and Steve, and I'm sure they will reach out to those of you who we haven't managed to get a hold of this evening on the live version. But in just closing, I have ended our post-webinar poll, which was asking, do you think controlled disturbance at nest sites should be allowed in order to generate revenue to conserve blue swallows? And Brent and Steve, if I can just ask you to elaborate a little bit on what controlled disturbance is. I see we got a few questions to that effect in the chat box before we reveal the results of that poll.
Okay, so I think controlled disturbance would probably, it's possibly a little bit misleading to actually use the word disturbance. It would be taking, under strict guidance, people to within the area where the nest site is for people to see the birds. It definitely does not mean taking people to the nest hole or allowing them to get into it to look at chicks and nests and stuff like that. That is definitely out of the question. But I think it's to take people to within 20, 30 meters of that nest hole to allow them good views of those birds going in and out. Under strict guidance, and not allowing them to go without a guide to make sure that they don't abuse anything. That is how I understand it.
Yeah, so it's basically allowing people to get good shots, good visuals of the bird. And so you're still kind of within the foraging range, the foraging area of those nest sites, and that's normally where you're going to get your best visuals, is in the close proximity to the nest sites. That is a reality, and people potentially might be prepared to pay to get up close and get really good pictures, even with the kind of technology that we have. Obviously, the closer you are, the better the kind of picture. And so, and that's what we're talking about. Controlled disturbance is there is some kind of disturbance when you traipsing through a grassland, whether you're disturbing the birds or the grassland, and what that potentially the knock-on effects are. And so that's what kind of we wanted to know is, are people happy that you are kind of impinging on a critically endangered nesting area to be able to generate some revenue that feeds back to saving that species.
Absolutely, and as always, we want the conservation and the well-being of the birds at the very forefront of what we do, but definitely allowing them to provide a bit of income to go back into their conservation needs to happen, and if that can be done in a controlled access way, that's fantastic. Right, guys, I think, oh, sorry, Steve.
I'll add a little thing quickly there, and that when we do our monitoring, we can't say that we don't have any impact or disturbance on these birds. However, we haven't seen any negative impact on their breeding, or we haven't ever seen a nest being vacated because we've gone and had checked the number of eggs in the nest and stuff. So, yeah, so I think we will, we as soon as there's any indication that something like this could have an impact on the breeding success of those birds, we will stop it immediately. And then also they're quite strict guidelines, monitoring guidelines on approaching a nest site and distances to stay from it and that kind of stuff, which was drawn up by ex-colleagues of ours several years ago, and we implement them now. So I think, yeah, as long as we control it, I think it's fine. It should be fine anyway.
Thank you both. And I see a couple of people after our little discussion there saying they would probably change their undecided and no votes to yeses now, given that there will be the well-being of the birds at the forefront of what you're doing. But the yeses won out with 42%, and the no's came in at 38%, with 20% of you undecided. So a great post-webinar poll there, Brent and Steve. And I think with that, we are a little bit over time compared to our normal schedule, but I'd just like to say a huge thank you to both of you. I know the amount of effort that went into your presentation this evening, and I really do appreciate it. And thank you so much for sharing the wonderful story of the blue swallow with our Conservation Conversations audience this evening. I don't know if either of you have any closing statements you'd like to share before we knock off this evening. I'll just let you have the floor for another minute or so, and then I'll sign us off.
So yeah, I just want to say thanks again. It's always a privilege when I get to share what my passion is, and that's about conserving our biodiversity. But at the end of the day, I'm not doing this for my own kudos or my own egos or anything. I'm doing that. I'm a father of three. I've got 3 young kids, and that's why I do this, because I want them to experience the same things and joys that I have. And that's what I do it for. So, you know, not to be cliched and say it's for future generations, but it is, because I want my kids to experience the same thing. And that's why I do this. And it's about relationships. It's about partnerships. I'm not here to get kudos for this at all. And if I can be part of a solution and part of the saving of a critically endangered species, that's great. If someone else takes the kudos, well, that's also fine. But as long as the species is saved.
Absolutely. I fully ditto for what Brent has just said. I've got 2 teenage boys of my own, and I feel very similarly. And, you know, they say that you can achieve anything in life as long as you don't mind who takes the credit. So that's something that I kind of subscribe to. And yeah, and I think we've got a really great partnership going. I really enjoy working with Brent and with BirdLife, with the BirdLife guys, and long may it last. It's I think we can achieve a lot, and certainly we will endeavor to do whatever we can that this bird doesn't further decline or heaven forbid go extinct, certainly not on our watch anyway. So yeah, but thank you everybody for listening tonight, and thanks again for the opportunity to talk to you all.
Great, thank you so much, Brent and Stephen. I think those are really powerful sentiments that you shared there. We certainly want to leave the world a better place than we found it. So here's to keeping the blue swallows around and turning that curve around so that there are many more of them gracing our misspelt grasslands going forward. And thank you both for the incredible work that you do. It honestly is a privilege to have this partnership going, and I think it really just stresses how important successful partnerships are in achieving conservation success. So long may it last, and we look forward to continuing to work on conserving these incredible birds with both of you and your organizations. And with that, I'd just like to say goodnight to everyone. Thank you all for sticking in till the very end. Keep your eyes on the skies, keep enjoying those birds. Andrew will be back with you next week for some penguinology, and I'm sure you will all enjoy that. And there are some really exciting talks lined up for the month of May. So stick with us every Tuesday, and we will see you next week. Good night, everyone. I'll leave the webinar open if you'd like to just type any last chat comments. I'll close it in a few minutes. Thanks so much for joining us. Good night, everyone.